The cold air seeped through the cracks in the attic, biting into Jasmine Ashford's skin. She was alone, the only sound a distant creak of floorboard below. She sat in the dark, her hands raw and red from scrubbing floors for hours. Her clothes, once fine, were now little more than rags. Jasmine had long lost track of the number of days she had spent trapped in this attic, away from the world and forgotten by her own family. She had been locked away, hidden from sight, while her stepmother and stepsisters lived lavishly in the rooms below. The house that had once been full of life, laughter, and love now echoed with the silence and neglect and cruelty. Through the thin walls, she could hear the bustling sounds of the grand preparations downstairs. The laughter of her stepmother, Lady Constance, and her stepsisters, Priscilla and Beatrice, echoed as they prepared for the most important event of the year, the county's biggest ball. Jasmine clenched her fists in frustration. They were downstairs, dressed in gowns and jewelry, making plans to catch the attention of nobility, while she was stuck up here, invisible and forgotten. A sharp, icy voice reached her ears, Lady Constance's. "That wretched girl gets nothing. Let her rot up there. She doesn't deserve a thing." The words cut deep, but Jasmine refused to cry. She had learned long ago not to show weakness. Instead, she reached for the small locket hanging around her neck, a relic of her mother who had passed when she was just 12. Her fingers brushed the cold metal, and she whispered softly, "I won't always be powerless." Her mother's voice seemed to echo in her mind, telling her to be strong, to endure, to never give up. The locket was the only thing left of her mother, her only connection to the past, to the life she once had, a life that had been ripped away when her father remarried, and the woman who came into their lives was nothing like the kind, gentle woman Jasmine had known. Lady Constance had never truly cared for her. Instead, she saw Jasmine as a nuisance, something to be erased. The sound of a carriage approaching the manor made Jasmine freeze. The steps from below paused as well. Who could that be at this hour? Jasmine wondered. It was unusual for anyone to visit, especially not at such a late hour. She strained her ears, listening to the hurried voices downstairs. Her stepmother's voice rang out once more. "No one is to disturb us tonight. We have guests coming, and nothing must ruin this evening." Jasmine shifted her weight, her curiosity getting the better of her. She silently crept closer to the attic door, pressing her ear to the wood. The muffled sounds of footsteps, voices, and the heavy creak of the front door filled the air. Then, a voice she didn't recognize echoed up the stairs. "A letter from Miss Jasmine Ashford. I must speak with her directly. It is of great importance." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Could it be possible? Was someone looking for her? She barely had time to process this thought before she heard Lady Constance's voice again, this time sharp with irritation. "She's away, traveling. Don't you dare bother us with such nonsense again." Jasmine clenched her jaw, not believing what she was hearing. Lady Constance was lying, as she always did, but this time it was different. The messenger was insistent. "Please," the messenger pressed, his tone desperate. "I was instructed by His Grace, the Duke of Thornfield, to deliver this personally." There was a pause. "Lady Jasmine Ashford's presence is required at tomorrow's garden luncheon, a matter of urgent family business." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. The Duke of Thornfield? What could he want with her? She knew nothing of him, only that he was one of the most powerful men in the county, a noble of great influence. What could he possibly need with her? Lady Constance's voice, though still cold, softened with an edge of suspicion. "Tomorrow's luncheon?" she muttered. "I'll see to this. You may leave." Jasmine's mind raced. What could the Duke want? A garden luncheon, a chance for the upper class to show off, to gather in their wealth and opulence. Why would someone like him want to meet with her, someone so far removed from that world? The sound of the door shutting below broke Jasmine from her thoughts. She strained to hear anything else, but the footsteps were fading. A moment later, the heavy thud of a letter being dropped on the ground echoed from below, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. Jasmine waited until she was sure no one was coming back. Slowly, she crept out of the attic, her heart pounding. The letter, the message from the Duke, it was a sign. She had to know more. She had to find a way to escape, to get out of this house, to reclaim what had been stolen from her. As she made her way back to the attic door, she spotted the letter on the floor. Without hesitation, she picked it up, and her hands trembled as she read the words on the page. The Duke requires Miss Ashford's presence at tomorrow's garden luncheon, a matter of urgent family business. Jasmine felt a spark of hope deep inside her. This was her chance. She would find a way to escape and discover what the Duke wanted. But first, she would need to survive the night. And just as she closed the attic door behind her, a whisper of determination escaped her lips. "I will not be powerless forever." Lady Constance's fingers trembled as she held the letter, her sharp eyes scanning the words over and over, her mind racing with possibilities. A letter from the Duke of Thornfield, the most powerful man in the county, summoning Jasmine, her stepdaughter, the girl she had long treated with disdain, to his manor. It was an unexpected twist, one that sent a ripple of unease through her. What could a Duke possibly want with Jasmine, a girl she had locked away, hidden from society, and kept as nothing more than a servant? The idea that such a prominent figure would seek her out was unfathomable. What did it mean? Was Jasmine truly someone of worth? Someone who could hold a claim to something? A legacy? The thoughts filled Lady Constance's mind like a storm, dark and unpredictable. Her voice shook as she spoke, barely above a whisper. "The Duke of Thornfield seeks Lady Jasmine Ashford, a matter of urgent family business." The words hung in the air like a foreboding omen. "He's looking for her," she repeated, her voice now steady with a mix of annoyance and curiosity. "But where is she? Where has she gone?" Her gaze shifted to the empty attic, where she knew Jasmine would be locked away, working tirelessly at her endless tasks. Jasmine, the girl who had once been the darling of Lord Ashford's life, before everything had fallen apart. A girl who had been forgotten by society, hidden in the shadows of her stepmother's cruel reign. The idea that someone like the Duke would take an interest in her sent a chill through Lady Constance's veins. If Jasmine had some claim to the Ashford legacy, to Lord Ashford's wealth, it could be disastrous. Everything that Lady Constance had worked for, the state, the power, was built on the deception that she had full control. The Duke's sudden involvement could ruin it all. Priscilla, Lady Constance's eldest daughter, was the first to speak up. Her voice was laced with both fear and greed. What if there's an inheritance? What if Jasmine has claims to something? What if the Duke's looking for her to make some sort of marriage agreement? What if this is our chance to solidify our future? Priscilla's eyes shone with the possibility of wealth, of power, of moving up in society. It was a dangerous thought, but one that had crossed Lady Constance's mind as well. If Jasmine had any claim to Lord Ashford's wealth, it could mean riches beyond their wildest dreams. But how could they take advantage of this opportunity? Lady Constance's mind raced. She had to think fast, had to act quickly. She would not let a single opportunity slip away. She turned to Priscilla with an idea forming in her mind, an idea that might just save everything. "Priscilla, you will go in her place," Lady Constance said, her voice calm, but with a dangerous edge. "We've kept Jasmine hidden for so long that no one will remember what she looks like. If you pretend to be Jasmine, no one will know the difference. You will be the one the Duke meets. You will have to play the part perfectly. We cannot let anyone know the truth." Priscilla's face was a mixture of excitement and fear. She had always wanted to be more than what she was. Just another daughter of a man who had died under mysterious circumstances, leaving them all in a precarious situation. But a marriage to a Duke? A chance to secure her future? It was worth the risk. But how will I pretend to be her? How can I possibly fool a Duke? Priscilla asked, her voice laced with doubt. Lady Constance, ever calculating, gave her daughter a cold smile. "Jasmine is nothing now. She's just a servant. No one will suspect anything. You will dress in her clothes, speak like her, and do exactly what I tell you. You're the perfect candidate for this. You have the charm, the grace that will make you seem like Jasmine Ashford. The Duke will not know the difference." Priscilla hesitated for only a moment before nodding, driven by the thought of the rewards that awaited her. As the plan was set into motion, the Duke of Thornfield, oblivious to the deceit that was unfolding, continued with his investigation into his late mother's deathbed confession. His mother had always hinted that there was a debt owed to the Ashford family, a debt that had been lingering for years. The Thornfield family had borrowed £50,000 from Jasmine's grandfather during a time of hardship, and the contract they had signed stated that if the money was not repaid within 20 years, the Thornfield family would either pay the debt or offer a marriage alliance to fulfill the agreement. The Duke's father had failed to repay the debt, and now it fell to Alexander to honor the contract. He had spent years searching for Jasmine, hoping that he would find her before the deadline expired. His mother's final words echoed in his mind. "Your father wronged the Ashfords, Alexander. A debt must be repaid. Find Jasmine Ashford, and you will set things right." The debt was a burden, one that Alexander could not escape. His title, his wealth, and the future of his family were tied to it. If he couldn't find Jasmine or offer her the money, he would have to honor the marriage clause of the contract. As the day of the garden luncheon at Thornfield Manor approached, the Duke grew more and more anxious. He knew the Ashford family was full of secrets, but he had no idea just how deep the deception went. When Priscilla arrived at Thornfield Manor, dressed in lavish clothes and exuding false elegance, she was met with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Duke Alexander, ever the formal and businesslike man, did not show his emotions as he greeted her. He had been trained to mask his feelings, to appear composed, no matter the circumstances. But as soon as he laid eyes on the woman before him, a sense of doubt crept into his mind. This was not the woman he had imagined, the woman he had expected to meet. The real Jasmine Ashford was a girl he had seen only in portraits and vague descriptions, a figure from the past who had disappeared into the shadows of time. But now, before him, stood a woman he did not recognize. Priscilla, pretending to be Jasmine, was charming, but there was something off about her, something that didn't quite fit. Still, she managed to play the role convincingly, acting overwhelmed and disoriented, just as Lady Constance had instructed her. Duke Alexander wasted no time in explaining the situation. He laid out the terms of the debt, outlining the two options he had to offer: a repayment of £50,000 or the marriage proposal that would fulfill the contract and satisfy his obligations. Priscilla, although inwardly panicked, remained composed. She had expected this moment, but now that it had arrived, she wasn't sure how to proceed. "I will consider both options, Your Grace," she replied, hoping to buy more time while she figured out her next move. The Duke, ever the man of duty, accepted her response without question, as the garden luncheon continued in full swing. Meanwhile, Jasmine remained locked in her attic, unaware of the events unfolding at Thornfield Manor. She had found the messenger's crest, the seal of the Thornfield family, lie on the floor, dropped during his visit, and it had sparked something inside her. She realized that this was her chance, her opportunity to escape, to seek out the truth, to claim what was rightfully hers. But as she looked through her father's old documents, her mind raced. She knew she had to act quickly before the false Jasmine could seal her fate. As the evening fell, Jasmine made her decision. She gathered what little she had: her mother's locket, the contract, and the determination to reclaim her future. She picked the lock on her attic door, something she had learned to do during her years of solitude, and slipped out of the house. The night was dark, and the rain was coming down in torrents, but she didn't care. She had to make her way to Thornfield Manor, 10 miles away, but it didn't matter. Her heart pounded in her chest as she began the long journey, the weight of the documents and the locket heavy in her hands. This was her moment. She would fight for her future. And this time, nothing would stop her. The Duke's mistake, the misunderstanding that had allowed Priscilla to impersonate her, was about to be corrected. But the storm had already begun, and Jasmine's journey was only just beginning. Jasmine's journey to Thornfield Manor, though determined and full of purpose, was quickly becoming an exhausting trial of her endurance. The rain had begun as a soft drizzle, but soon turned into a torrential downpour, soaking her to the bone as she stumbled through the muddy road, each step growing more difficult as her body, weakened by years of neglect, fought against her. She hadn't eaten properly in days, and the hunger gnawed at her insides, but there was no time to stop. She had to make it to Thornfield, to confront the Duke, to demand what was rightfully hers. Every mile seemed to stretch further as the storm intensified, the howling wind pushing against her, trying to force her back into the shadows where she had spent the last few years. But Jasmine refused to go back to that life. Her heart, heavy with the burden of her past, nevertheless beat with a fierce resolve. Her father's death, the stolen inheritance, the years of being hidden away, all of it had led her to this moment. She was close to reclaiming everything that had been taken from her. As the storm raged on, Jasmine's vision blurred. Her legs were shaking with exhaustion, her breath coming in labored gasps, and she could feel herself weakening with each step. But still, she pressed on, her thoughts of the future pushing her forward. A vague memory of her father's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that she was capable, that she was strong enough to survive anything. But the storm was relentless, and her body, unable to keep up with her spirit, finally betrayed her. 2 miles from Thornfield Manor, Jasmine collapsed onto the muddy road, the world around her spinning as darkness closed in. She didn't know how long she lay there, barely conscious, the cold seeping into her bones. The sound of the rain pounding the earth was the last thing she remembered before everything faded away. In the distance, Duke Alexander Thornfield was finishing his morning ride, something he did regularly to clear his mind. It had been a long few days filled with tedious meetings and the weight of his responsibility bearing down on him. His thoughts, heavy with the debt his father had left unresolved, were interrupted by the sight of something on the road ahead. At first, he thought it was just a traveler caught in the storm, but as he got closer, he saw the figure lying there, unmoving in the mud. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the locket around the woman's neck, the unmistakable Ashford family crest, a symbol he had seen many times in his mother's journals. This wasn't just any woman. This was Jasmine Ashford, the very person he had been searching for, the one who held the key to resolving the debt that had haunted his family for years. Duke Alexander dismounted quickly, his heart pounding in his chest as he rushed to her side. Her body was cold, drenched in rain, and her face was pale. Her breathing was shallow, and her hands, though rough from hard labor, held on to the papers that had once been her father's, the documents that tied her family to the Thornfields. He knelt beside her, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. She was clearly exhausted, starving, and sick from the storm. It was a miracle she had made it this far. Gently, he lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as he turned toward his horse. His mind was racing, wondering how she could be in such a state. This wasn't the confident, determined woman he had expected to meet. This was a broken figure, a woman who had been abandoned and left to suffer. As he rode back to Thornfield Manor, carrying her in his arms, Duke Alexander couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt. How had it come to this? How had the Ashford heir been left to roam the streets alone, vulnerable and neglected? His heart ached as he thought of the years she must have spent in isolation, struggling against the forces that had torn her family apart. He didn't know yet what had happened to her, but he would find out. The storm seemed to intensify as they made their way to the manor, the wind howling around them as if to emphasize the urgency of the situation. He was angry at himself for not realizing sooner how close she had come to losing her life. He had spent so much time focusing on the contract, on the debt owed to his family, that he hadn't considered what might have happened to the person at the center of it all. As they arrived at Thornfield Manor, Duke Alexander immediately ordered his servants to prepare a room for her, calling for the housekeeper, Mrs. Dawson, and the doctor. The storm was relentless, and he knew that Jasmine needed immediate attention if she was going to survive. He carried her into the warm interior of the manor, where the crackling of the fire seemed like a distant, comforting sound. He laid her on a plush bed, removing her sodden clothes and wrapping her in blankets, his movements careful and tender. Mrs. Dawson arrived quickly, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of the pale, unconscious woman. "Your Grace," she said, her voice filled with concern. "Who is this woman? What has happened?" The Duke stood over Jasmine's prone form, his face a mass of determination. "This is Jasmine Ashford," he said quietly, his voice filled with a strange mixture of awe and frustration. "She is the woman who holds the key to my family's debt." Mrs. Dawson nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation, but her eyes remained fixed on the woman before her. The doctor arrived shortly afterward, his face grim as he examined Jasmine's condition. He confirmed what the Duke had feared. She was suffering from severe exhaustion, malnutrition, and the effects of the storm. "She needs rest and nourishment," the doctor said after a thorough examination. "I would recommend keeping her here until she is stable enough to travel. She has been through much, and it will take time for her to recover." The Duke nodded, his jaw tightening as he watched the doctor work. He didn't care what it took. Jasmine's well-being was his priority now. As the doctor prepared to leave, he turned to the Duke and Mrs. Dawson. "We will monitor her condition closely, Your Grace. But I believe with proper care, she will recover." The Duke let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. He looked down at Jasmine, his gaze softening. She was still unconscious, her face pale and flushed with fever. But there was something about her that called to him, something about her strength, her resilience, that made him want to protect her at all costs. As the days passed, the Duke found himself visiting her room often. He had ordered the best care for her, and though she was still weak, Jasmine slowly began to regain some of her strength. Every time he entered the room, he saw the same fierce determination in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her to walk through the storm. And with every passing day, his respect for her grew. One afternoon, Jasmine finally stirred from her sleep, her eyes blinking open as she looked around the unfamiliar room. The warmth of the fire and the soft bed beneath her were a far cry from the cold, damp attic she had spent so many years in. Her mind was cloudy, and she couldn't immediately remember how she had come to be here, but she knew that something had changed. The first thing she noticed was the figure standing by the door, the Duke. He was studying her carefully, his expression unreadable, but there was an undeniable softness in his eyes. Jasmine struggled to sit up, her body weak and uncooperative, but the Duke was there, helping her gently. "You're awake," he said softly, his voice reassuring. Jasmine blinked at him, her thoughts racing. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse from days of fever. "You're at Thornfield Manor," the Duke replied, his voice steady. "You were found on the road, unconscious, and brought here. You've been very ill, but you're safe now." Jasmine's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of memory. The storm, the road, the locket. She remembered everything. She remembered why she had been on that road, and she felt a surge of determination flood her chest. She wasn't just some charity case. She wasn't some forgotten servant. She was Jasmine Ashford, and she was going to take control of her life again. She looked up at the Duke, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and resolve. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice quiet but strong. "You've saved my life, but I'm not here to be saved. I'm here to reclaim my future." The Duke met her gaze, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he nodded. "We'll face this together," he said quietly, his voice full of determination. "We'll make sure that everything that's been taken from you is returned." Jasmine felt a spark of hope. She had fought so long to be seen, to be heard, and now, standing before her was a man who had given her a chance. The chance to start over, to take back what had been stolen from her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she knew that it would be hers to shape. The Duke had given her that, and for the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt ready to fight. The following morning, Duke Alexander and Jasmine made their way back to Ashford Manor, a place that, until now, had been nothing more than a haunting memory for Jasmine. The Duke's carriage, grand and imposing, rumbled to the gates of the manor, and as it came to a stop in front of the house, Jasmine could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had not set foot here in years, and the thought of facing her stepmother and stepsisters, of confronting the lies and cruelty that had defined her life for so long, filled her with a mixture of fear and determination. The estate that had once been a symbol of her family's wealth and legacy now stood as a reminder of everything she had lost. Her fingers tightened around the documents that had been passed down to her by her late father, the hidden will, the papers that proved she was a rightful heir. These were her weapons, her key to reclaiming what was hers. But as the Duke helped her out of the carriage and they made their way toward the front door, she couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. The years of suffering, the years of silence, the years of being forced into the shadows. The door to Ashford Manor opened before them, and as they stepped inside, Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. The house looked much the same as she remembered, grand, cold, and imposing. The same marble floors, the same high ceilings, but the warmth had long since disappeared. She could almost hear the echoes of her father's voice, of the days when this house had been a home, a place of love and laughter. Now, it was a place of lies and deceit, a place where her stepmother and stepsisters had built their lives on falsehoods. As they walked through the halls, Jasmine's mind flashed back to the countless days she had spent locked away in the attic, hidden from the world, from the life she had once known. The cruel words of her stepmother rang in her ears, words that had made her feel small, invisible, unworthy. But now, she was no longer that girl. She had the Duke by her side, and with him, she felt a sense of strength she hadn't known in years. The confrontation was inevitable, and Jasmine knew that this was her chance to take back what was rightfully hers. As they approached the drawing room, the door opened, and her stepmother, Lady Constance, appeared in the doorway. Her expression, once cold and calculating, faltered for a moment as she saw Jasmine standing there, her face pale but determined. But before she could speak, her eldest daughter, Priscilla, stepped forward, her eyes widening in shock. "Jasmine? How are you here?" she stammered, her voice laced with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Jasmine didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, her gaze locking with her stepmother's. "You thought you could hide the truth forever, didn't you, Lady Constance?" she said, her voice steady but filled with an underlying fury. "You thought you could steal everything from me and get away with it. But today everything changes." Lady Constance's eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment it seemed as though she might lash out. But then she seemed to gather herself, putting on a facade of calm. "Jasmine," she said, her voice smooth but with an edge of tension. "You've been gone for so long, and now you return with these wild accusations? What are you talking about?" The Duke stepped forward, his presence commanding and unwavering. "Lady Constance," he said, his voice cold, "I think you know exactly what she's talking about. I've come to set the record straight. This estate," he paused, glancing at Jasmine, "belongs to her, not you. The papers that have been used to claim ownership of this estate were forged, and the will your family presented was nothing but a lie." Lady Constance's face drained of color, and she took a step back, her eyes darting nervously toward Priscilla and Beatrice, who were standing by the door, clearly unsure of what was happening. "What are you talking about?" Priscilla asked, her voice shaky. "Jasmine can't own the estate. She's just a servant." Jasmine's heart ached at the words, but she didn't let them break her. Instead, she turned to face Priscilla, her gaze hardening. "That's what you've always thought, hasn't it? That I was nothing more than a servant. But I am the rightful heir to this estate, Priscilla. My father's will proves it." She took the papers from a bag she had been carrying and handed them to the Duke, who passed them to the family lawyer, Mr. Pembroke. As the lawyer examined the papers, his face grew pale, and he looked up at Lady Constance in shock. "This is the original will," he said quietly, "the will that was hidden away for years. It clearly states that the estate belongs to Jasmine Ashford, and all previous claims were fraudulent." Lady Constance's face twisted with fury, and she took a step forward, her voice trembling with anger. "This is absurd," she spat. "There must be some mistake. This is my home. This is my family's legacy. You can't take it from us." But Jasmine stood firm, her shoulders squared as she faced her stepmother. "It was never yours to take, Lady Constance," she said coldly. "You stole everything from me, from my father's legacy, and now I'm taking it back." The room fell silent as the weight of Jasmine's words hung in the air. Lady Constance, her face a mask of rage, turned to Priscilla, her eyes narrowing. "You betrayed me," she hissed. "You were supposed to help me keep this from her, to keep the Duke from finding out. And now look what's happened. You've ruined everything." Priscilla, her face pale with guilt, took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. "I didn't mean to," she began, but Lady Constance silenced her with a glare. "You did exactly what I told you to do. And now look where it's gotten us." Her voice was rising, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire room was on the verge of chaos. But then Beatrice, the younger stepsister, spoke up, her voice small and trembling. "Mother, we didn't know. We didn't know what you were doing." Lady Constance turned on her, her face twisted with rage. "You knew nothing, Beatrice. You were too weak to do anything. You let me handle everything." Beatrice, her voice barely above a whisper, stepped forward, her eyes filled with remorse. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know how to stop her. I was afraid of what she'd do to me." Lady Constance's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it seemed as though she might strike her daughter. But then the Duke stepped forward, his voice commanding. "Enough, Lady Constance. This is over. You've lost." His words were like a sword cutting through the tension in the room. Lady Constance took a step back, her face pale as she realized that she had no power left. The Duke turned to Jasmine, his expression softening. "The estate is yours, Jasmine," he said quietly. "You fought for it, and now it's yours to claim." Jasmine felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of relief and triumph. She had fought for this moment for so long, and now it was finally here. The life that had been stolen from her was being returned piece by piece. The Duke's words were like a balm to her soul. She had done it. She had reclaimed her future. But there was still one final piece to address. Jasmine turned to face her stepmother, her eyes hardening with resolve. "You've taken everything from me, Lady Constance," she said coldly. "But now I take it all back. The estate, my father's legacy, and my dignity. You will pay for what you've done." Lady Constance's eyes burned with hatred, but she said nothing. She knew that she had been defeated. The Duke stepped forward, his presence looming over the room. "Lady Constance, Priscilla, Beatrice, your actions have been unforgivable. You will face the consequences of your deceit. This estate belongs to its rightful heir now, and there will be no more lies." As the servants moved to escort Lady Constance and her daughters from the room, Jasmine felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. This was it, the end of her suffering, the end of the lies, the beginning of her freedom. The Duke stood by her side, his gaze softening as he watched her. "What will you do now, Jasmine?" he asked quietly. Jasmine turned to face him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I will rebuild," she said softly. "I will restore this estate, honor my father's memory, and make sure that nothing like this ever happens again." The Duke nodded, his eyes filled with admiration. "I will help you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "We will do it together." As they stood there, side by side, Jasmine felt a surge of hope for the future. The battle had been hard, but she had won. And now, with the Duke by her side, she was ready to build a life she had once thought impossible. The road ahead would not be easy, but Jasmine knew that she was no longer alone. She had the strength, the love, and the future she had always dreamed of. Together, they would face whatever came next. And this time, Jasmine would be the one to define her destiny. The days that followed the confrontation with her step-family were a blur for Jasmine. She had reclaimed her inheritance, but the reality of her situation was still settling in. For years, she had been deprived of any sense of self-worth, subjected to cruelty and lies, but now she was free, and it was a strange, unfamiliar feeling. She had the estate, her father's legacy, but there was also something else that she hadn't expected. The Duke. Duke Alexander Thornfield had not only offered her protection, but had shown her a side of himself that few had seen. His initial coldness had given way to an unexpected kindness, and Jasmine couldn't help but wonder what his intentions were. The Duke's visits to her room had become a regular occurrence. He wasn't a man of idle conversation, but there was an intensity to him that intrigued her. He brought with him thoughtful gifts, books, flowers for the garden, and even a rare painting that she had mentioned admiring in passing. Each gift was a sign of his growing interest in her, but Jasmine kept her distance. She had learned long ago not to trust anyone completely. Despite the undeniable pull between them, she couldn't shake the fear that he might be like the others, someone who saw her as nothing more than an object to be possessed. But the more time she spent in his presence, the more she realized that Duke Alexander was different. Their conversations began to flow more easily, and she found herself enjoying his company, even as she tried to keep her emotions in check. The Duke, for his part, was becoming more and more taken by her. She was nothing like the women he had known, polished, well-bred, and trained to fit the mold of a noble woman. Jasmine was fierce, independent, and unapologetically herself. There was a quiet strength in her that he admired, a resilience that made her even more captivating. He saw past the rough exterior, past the servant's rags she had worn for years. He saw the woman beneath. He found himself wanting to know more about her, not because of the contract that bound them, but because of the person she was. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, Duke Alexander invited Jasmine to take a walk with him through the estate gardens. The air was fresh, the flowers blooming in full splendor, but it wasn't the beauty of the garden that held Jasmine's attention. It was the Duke, standing beside her, his presence both comforting and unnerving. As they walked, the conversation shifted to more personal matters. The Duke spoke of his childhood, of the pressures he had faced as the heir to the Thornfield estate, and of his mother's death. He revealed his loneliness, how his title and wealth had often isolated him from those he truly wished to connect with. Jasmine listened intently, her heart softening at his vulnerability. She hadn't expected this from him. He had always seemed so composed, so controlled, but now she saw a different side, a side that was haunted by his own burdens. As they walked along the path, the conversation turned to her past. Jasmine hesitated, but knew that this was part of what had drawn them together. She spoke of her father, her mother's untimely death, and the years she had spent at Ashford Manor, hidden away and treated like a servant. She didn't go into every painful detail, but enough to allow him a glimpse of the woman she had become. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I didn't ask for a life of suffering, but it has made me who I am. I can't change that." The Duke turned to her, his expression softening. "You've endured more than most could bear," he said, his voice sincere. "But I see the strength in you, Jasmine, and that is what I admire most." His words, simple as they were, struck something deep inside her. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever acknowledged her strength, her resilience. Most had only seen her as a victim, as someone to be pitied. But here was the Duke, a man who had everything, and yet he saw her, truly saw her, for who she was. The moment was fragile, fleeting, but Jasmine couldn't deny the connection between them. The walk continued in silence, both lost in their thoughts. As they approached the garden's edge, the Duke stopped and turned to face her. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a brief moment before he lowered it. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low, "I know I am a man of duty, a man bound by tradition and expectation. But I also know what I feel." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She had been expecting this, had prepared herself for it. But now, standing before him, she wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't sure what she felt. "What is it you feel?" she asked softly, her heart pounding in her chest. The Duke looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "I feel a connection, a bond that goes beyond the contract. I want to know you, Jasmine, for who you are, not for the papers that tie us together." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Jasmine's mind raced. She wanted to believe him, to trust him, but she had been hurt before. She had been betrayed and abandoned, and the last thing she wanted was to be used again. She took a step back, her eyes locking with his. "I don't need your money, Your Grace," she said firmly. "I never did. I need my freedom, my dignity, and my own choices." The Duke nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "And I will give you all of that, Jasmine. But I also want to offer you something more. I want to offer you the chance to know me, to understand me. And if you will allow me, I want to know you in return." His words, though carefully chosen, were honest, and Jasmine could see the sincerity in his eyes. She wanted to push him away, to remind him of their differences, but something in her heart told her to stop. Something in her heart told her to listen, to give him a chance. And so, after a long pause, she finally spoke. "I'm not ready to trust anyone completely, Your Grace. Not yet, but I will give you the chance to prove yourself, to show me who you really are." The Duke smiled, a small, genuine smile that made her heart skip a beat. "I will earn your trust, Jasmine. I promise you that." Over the next few days, the Duke's visits became more frequent. He continued to bring thoughtful gifts, but more than that, he showed genuine interest in her well-being. He made it clear that he was not there to impose, but to support her in whatever way she needed. Jasmine found herself slowly opening up, sharing parts of herself she had long kept hidden. She began to trust him, if only a little. And with each passing day, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. The Duke, for his part, was patient. He understood the scars that marked her, and he wasn't in a rush to claim her affection. He wanted her to choose him, not because of obligation or the contract, but because she truly wanted him. As they spent more time together, the connection between them deepened. They spoke of everything and nothing, books, music, childhood memories. And with each conversation, Jasmine found herself falling for him. But she still kept a piece of herself back, a piece that reminded her of the pain she had endured and the woman she had become. The courtship, though slow and careful, was moving forward. And despite her doubts, Jasmine couldn't deny that her heart was beginning to soften toward him. The Duke had shown her more than kindness. He had shown her respect, something she had never received from anyone. And for the first time in a long while, Jasmine began to wonder if there could be something more between them. A love built not on obligation, but on mutual respect and understanding. But as the days passed, she knew that the path ahead would not be easy. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. And although she had come to care for the Duke, she knew she had to protect herself. The road ahead would be difficult, but Jasmine was determined to navigate it on her own terms. She had already survived so much. Now, she would determine her own future. Jasmine's growing connection with Duke Alexander Thornfield was not without its challenges, and the whispers of society soon began to echo through the halls of Thornfield Manor, though not for the reasons either of them had hoped. It started slowly, with idle gossip and murmurs at the social gatherings Duke Alexander had been attending without his usual formalities. He was a duke, after all, and had been known for keeping his personal life as orderly and controlled as his vast estates. But now, whispers about his involvement with a woman of questionable status were spreading like wildfire, the scandal only growing with every passing day. The whispers grew louder when the county's most influential society matron, Lady Pemberton, a woman who prided herself on propriety and status, attended a dinner at Thornfield Manor and saw the Duke in conversation with Jasmine. As the evening went on, the entire gathering had taken notice of the way the Duke looked at her. Something different, something personal. It wasn't just a passing glance. It was genuine. The gossip that followed was swift and biting. "Have you heard?" Lady Pemberton said to her companion, in a voice loud enough for others to overhear. "The Duke is involved with that Ashford girl. She's the one who spent years as a servant in her own home. Imagine, a woman of such circumstances, trying to make her way into the Duke's circle." The words cut through the air like a sword. As the evening unfolded, the buzz about the Duke's scandalous interest in Jasmine was unavoidable. People who had once been eager to dine at Thornfield Manor or seek the Duke's favor were now carefully distancing themselves, murmuring about the shame he was bringing on himself. Despite the Duke's status, his involvement with someone from Jasmine's background seemed too unseemly for the old aristocracy. It was enough to draw even the attention of his own advisers, who began to warn him of the consequences. The pressure was immense. His own family, his Uncle Lord Thornfield in particular, had made it clear that this was not a marriage he could afford. "Your Grace," his uncle said during a private meeting, "you must understand the political ramifications of your actions. You are a duke, a figure of influence. The scandal could ruin everything. A woman like her, who was once a servant in her own house. She is not someone the public will ever accept as your wife." But Duke Alexander, who had been raised on duty and honor, found himself torn between the pressures of his lineage and his growing feelings for Jasmine. He had spent much of his life in the public eye, always expected to marry someone of noble birth, someone who would elevate his title. But as he looked at Jasmine, something inside him shifted. She was not the polished, poised woman that society expected, but she was strong, resilient, and her spirit was something that spoke to him on a deeper level. As the societal pressure mounted, Jasmine found herself retreating more into herself. She had always been a woman who kept her emotions in check, but the mounting rumors were starting to take their toll. The fear of being rejected again, of being viewed as nothing more than a pawn in some grand social game, filled her with dread. Despite the Duke's reassurances, despite his promises of protection, Jasmine could not escape the bitter sting of society's judgment. It felt like history was repeating itself. The life she had fought so hard to escape had followed her here, clinging to her like a shadow. At one of the county's biggest events, a gathering of the county's most powerful families, things took a turn for the worse. Lady Pemberton, eager to fan the flames of scandal, took the opportunity to confront Jasmine publicly. As the Duke and Jasmine arrived together, whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Lady Pemberton, her face twisted with disdain, made her move. "Lady Jasmine Ashford, is it true?" she called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is it true that you spent years in your own home as a servant?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Jasmine. The Duke's protective arm instinctively moved to shield her, but Jasmine stood tall, refusing to shrink beneath the weight of their stares. She met Lady Pemberton's gaze, her voice steady and firm. "Yes, it's true, and I have no shame in it. What was forced upon me is not my fault." The crowd murmured, but Lady Pemberton wasn't finished. "But, Your Grace," she said, turning to the Duke with feigned sympathy, "surely you cannot be serious in courting someone of such questionable circumstances. How could anyone with such a history possibly be worthy of a Duke's time?" The room seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for the Duke's response. For a moment, it seemed as though he might remain silent, caught in the web of societal expectations. But then he spoke. His voice was cold, authoritative, and utterly unwavering. "Lady Jasmine Ashford is a woman of strength, of resilience. She has faced hardships that would break many, and yet she stands before you with more dignity than any of you can claim. She survived when others would have crumbled, and that, in my eyes, makes her stronger than anyone else in this room." The words hung in the air, the weight of them sinking in as a few of the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Lady Pemberton's eyes flashed with outrage, but she said nothing more. The Duke had made his stance clear. He would stand by Jasmine, no matter what society thought of them. But the battle was far from over. Rumors continued to circulate, and the pressure mounted as those who had once admired the Duke began to turn away, eager to distance themselves from the scandal. Lord Blackwood, a rival of the Duke's, took the opportunity to spread malicious rumors. The Duke is being manipulated by that girl. She's after his fortune, after his title, he whispered to anyone who would listen. Anonymous letters began appearing throughout society, warning of Jasmine's scheming ways and her hidden agenda. Even some of the Duke's closest advisors started to whisper doubts in his ear. "Your Grace," one of his more cautious advisors said, "this association is damaging your reputation. The public sees her as nothing more than a gold digger, using the Duke to secure her own future." The pressure began to weigh heavily on both of them. Jasmine, feeling the sting of the attacks, withdrew further into herself. She began to wonder if the Duke's reputation, his standing, would be permanently tainted by his association with her. Was this worth it? Was she worth it? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had become the source of his turmoil, and she could not bear to be the cause of his downfall. One night, unable to sleep, Jasmine overheard the Duke arguing with his uncle in a private study. "This girl will ruin you, Alexander. She's not a woman of your world. She's a scandal waiting to happen." Lord Thornfield spat, his voice harsh. "You need to end this for your sake and for family." The Duke's response was quieter, but there was no mistaking the resolve in his voice. "I care for her, uncle, more than you know." Jasmine, overhearing the conversation, felt her heart break. He cared for her. He truly did. But the world, society, was making it impossible for him to be with her. The weight of his responsibilities, of his lineage, was far heavier than the love he had for her. She had always known that her past would come back to haunt her, but hearing his words confirmed it. In a moment of clarity, Jasmine made a decision. She wrote a letter to the Duke, one that would change everything. "Your Grace," she began, her handwriting steady despite the pain in her heart, "I release you from any obligation. Take back your money, your title, and your reputation. You owe me nothing more. You have given me my freedom, and for that I am forever grateful. But I cannot be the cause of your destruction. Please let me go." She left the letter on the Duke's desk and disappeared from the manor, telling the servant she was indisposed. She had made her choice. To protect him, to give him the freedom he needed to live without the burden of their scandal. The Duke, devastated, realized too late that Jasmine was trying to protect him, but he wouldn't give up on her. Not now, not ever. The days following Jasmine's departure were the longest Duke Alexander had ever endured. He couldn't focus on anything, not his duties, not his estate, not the endless meetings with advisors and magistrates. His mind kept drifting back to her strength, her resilience, the way she had changed everything. He had known from the moment he first met her that she was unlike any woman he had ever known. There was an undeniable pull between them, something raw and real, but society's expectations had placed a weight on both their shoulders that neither could easily bear. Yet it was the fear of losing her, of being without her, that paralyzed him more than any social obstacle ever could. When he found her letter, his heart dropped into his stomach. Her words were clear, written with a sense of finality that left him no room for argument. She had given him everything, her love, her strength, her loyalty, and he had been too blind to see it. Instead, he had let the pressure of the world dictate his choices. He hadn't fought for her when he should have, and now he feared it was too late. But the letter also made something else clear. Jasmine was protecting him. She was giving him the opportunity to walk away, to live his life without the stain of their scandal. It was a selfless act, one that revealed the depth of her love and the pain she must have been feeling. The Duke couldn't allow it. He wouldn't let her slip away from him, not after everything they had been through together. He would fight for her, even if it meant going against everything he had been taught, against the rules of society, against the very traditions that had shaped his life. The decision was made. He would go to her, no matter the consequences. He didn't care if society turned its back on him, if his name was tarnished forever. His love for Jasmine was real, and it was worth the fight. He rode out to Ashford Manor early the next morning, determined to find her and tell her everything he had been too afraid to admit. The estate was quiet when he arrived, the early morning mist still clinging to the air. The house, once so full of the sounds of people and activity, now seemed empty. It was as if the life had been drained from it, just as Jasmine had felt drained by the lies and cruelty of her past. He entered the manor without ceremony, making his way to the familiar study. There, sitting at her father's desk, was Jasmine, looking more beautiful than he had ever seen her. Her back was to him, but he could feel the tension in her posture, the distance between them that had grown so wide. He hesitated for a moment, unsure how to approach her, but his heart urged him forward. "Jasmine," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight of emotion. She stiffened at the sound of his voice, but she didn't turn around. "You shouldn't be here," she replied quietly, her words laced with pain. "You've done enough for me. You've given me more than I could have ever hoped for. But I can't let you destroy your life for me. I've already taken too much from you." The Duke took a step closer, his gaze never leaving her. "You haven't taken anything from me," he said firmly. "You've given me everything, everything I've ever wanted and more. I'm not going to let you walk away because of some misguided sense of duty. I love you, Jasmine, and I won't let you go." Her shoulders trembled as she slowly turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand," she whispered. "This isn't about love. It's about the life you've built, the title you hold, the expectations you face. I can't be the cause of your downfall." The Duke shook his head, his heart breaking at the sight of her pain. "You are not the cause of my downfall, Jasmine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the reason I finally see the truth. You've taught me that there's more to life than titles and wealth. There's love, there's honor, and there's a chance to live a life that matters." He took another step forward, reaching out to gently grasp her hands in his. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Jasmine, not because of some contract, not because of duty, but because I love you. I don't care what society thinks or what my family thinks. I want to be with you." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat, her heart racing. The words she had longed to hear, the words she had feared would never come, were finally spoken. She had spent so long building walls around herself, protecting herself from the world's cruelty. But now, with the Duke standing before her, offering her everything, she felt the walls begin to crumble. She had never allowed herself to believe in love, real love, the kind that wasn't conditional or forced. But the Duke was offering her that love. He was offering her a future, one built on trust, respect, and a bond that went beyond social expectations. "But what about everything we've lost?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What about the scandal, the rumors, the judgment? We can't escape that." The Duke smiled softly, brushing a strand of her hair away from her face. "We don't have to escape it, Jasmine. We just have to face it together." He paused, his eyes full of certainty. "You and I, together, we can change the narrative. We can show the world that love is stronger than any title, any expectation, any rumor." Jasmine's heart swelled with emotion. She had spent so many years trying to prove her worth, trying to escape the shadows of her past. But now, with the Duke by her side, she realized she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She was enough. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of losing you, scared of failing again." The Duke's expression softened, his thumb gently caressing her hand. "We're both scared," he said, "but we're stronger together. Jasmine, I won't let you go. I won't lose you. I'll fight for you, for us, no matter what." The words he spoke filled her with warmth, with a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. She had always fought for survival, but now, for the first time, she realized she was fighting for something worth holding on to. Her eyes locked with his, and in that moment, everything else faded away. The scandal, the rumors, the expectations, they didn't matter. All that mattered was the love they shared, the future they could build together. "Okay," she said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and vulnerability. "Okay, I'll fight with you." The Duke's eyes lit up with joy, and without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I'll never let you go, Jasmine. I promise you." The world outside may have been filled with judgment and scorn, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They had each other, and that was all they needed. The Duke kissed her softly, a kiss that was filled with the promise of a future together. A future where they could face whatever challenges came their way, side by side. And as they pulled away, their foreheads resting against each other, the Duke whispered, "This is just the beginning, Jasmine. Our beginning." Jasmine smiled, her heart full for the first time in years. "Our beginning," she whispered back. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the future seemed limitless, and for the first time, Jasmine felt truly at home. Together, they could face anything. Together, they would create a love story that would be their own, one that no one could take away. The days following Duke Alexander's declaration marked the beginning of a new chapter in both his and Jasmine's lives. While the world around them continued to buzz with judgment, the couple forged ahead with quiet determination, unshaken by the whispers that tried to tear them apart. The Duke's bold declaration at Thornfield Manor had caused quite a stir, but to Jasmine, it had been a confirmation of everything she had feared and hoped for. She was no longer the broken woman locked away in an attic, hiding from a past of cruelty and deceit. She was a woman loved, cherished, and offered a future that stretched before her like an open road. The society that once rejected her began to shift in response to the Duke's actions. People who had once dismissed her as an outsider began to reconsider their judgment. There were still those who whispered behind her back, but they were fewer, and their voices were no longer loud enough to drown out the sound of the life she was building with Alexander. Jasmine had reclaimed her father's estate, her dignity, and most importantly, her voice. But what she hadn't expected was how much she would come to cherish the life that was waiting for her at Thornfield Manor. The grand halls were no longer cold and oppressive. They had become her home, a place filled with warmth, not just from the fires that crackled on the hearth, but from the love that had slowly grown between her and the Duke. The days were filled with quiet moments, soft laughter, and shared smiles that made everything seem right again. For the first time in years, Jasmine felt truly free. Free to be herself, free to love, free to build a future that was hers and hers alone. The Duke, too, had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. Once driven solely by duty and the expectations of his title, he had discovered a new kind of fulfillment in his relationship with Jasmine. She had shown him that there was more to life than wealth and status. She had shown him that love, when given freely, could be the greatest treasure of all. The nights they spent together were filled with long talks about the future, about dreams of family, and a life beyond the responsibilities that had once defined them both. Jasmine was no longer just a woman he had been bound by a contract. She was the woman he wanted by his side, not because of any obligation, but because she had become his equal in every way. The time they spent together deepened their bond. The Duke's visits to her room became more frequent, not because of duty, but because they had both come to cherish each other's company. Jasmine had become more than just a figurehead in his life. She had become his confidant, his partner, his love. Together, they began to rebuild Ashford Manor, turning it from a place of suffering into a home filled with laughter, light, and possibility. But despite the peace they found in each other's arms, the shadows of their past were never far behind. They both knew that the road ahead would not be without its challenges. Society, though slowly changing, still held its prejudices, and the Duke's association with Jasmine was often the subject of cruel rumors. There were whispers that they were unfit to be married, that their union would tarnish his reputation. But neither of them wavered. Duke Alexander knew the price of love was sometimes high, but he was willing to pay it. In the quiet moments, as they sat together by the fireside or walked through the estate's gardens, Jasmine would often find herself reflecting on how far she'd come. She had been forced into silence for so long, made to feel invisible, but now she was seen. She was no longer the girl in the attic. She was a woman with her own future, her own voice. And in Alexander's eyes, She was everything. She knew that the past had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She was building a new legacy with the Duke, a legacy that was built on love, mutual respect, and strength. The love between them had not come easily, nor had it been without its sacrifices. But as they stood together in the garden, watching the sun set over the estate, Jasmine felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This was her home, and the man beside her was the man she had chosen, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The love they shared wasn't a fairy tale. It was real. It was flawed, complicated, and beautiful in its own right. As they held hands, Jasmine knew that this was only the beginning. They had faced the storms together, both literal and figurative, and now they were ready to face whatever came next. They didn't need society's approval or anyone else's validation. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. Their story wasn't one of perfect circumstances or smooth paths. It was a story of resilience, of fighting for what was right, and of choosing love over fear. And as they began to build a future together, one where they would raise children and live a life of service to those they loved, Jasmine knew she had found her true home. The next morning, Duke Alexander and Jasmine stood side by side at the manor's front door, welcoming their guests for a grand celebration, a wedding, but not just any wedding. It was a wedding that represented more than a union of two people. It represented the triumph of love over adversity, of courage in the face of doubt. The guests, once skeptical of their union, now saw the strength of their bond, and they, too, began to understand that love, when true, was never something to be ashamed of. The ceremony was simple but elegant, a reflection of their shared values. Jasmine walked herself down the aisle, her father's ring on her finger, her mother's locket around her neck, a symbol of the past that had shaped her but no longer defined her. As she reached the altar, her eyes locked with the Duke's, and in that moment, all the trials they faced seemed insignificant compared to the love they shared. The vows were personal, deeply emotional. They spoke not of grand promises, but of real commitments, of building a life together, of supporting each other through whatever came their way. The wedding was a small, intimate affair, with only their closest friends and family in attendance. But it was the perfect reflection of their journey. It wasn't about wealth or status. It was about them, about the love they had fought for. As the ceremony ended and the guests celebrated in the gardens, the Duke and Jasmine stole a quiet moment for themselves. Together, they looked out over the horizon, their future stretching out before them. "We did it," Jasmine whispered, her heart full of gratitude. "We made it through the darkness." Duke Alexander smiled, pulling her close. "And now we get to live in the light." They kissed, a promise of forever sealed in that simple act. As the evening wore on, Jasmine found herself surrounded by family and friends, people who had once doubted her, now celebrating her success. And as the sun set on their wedding day, Jasmine knew that her life was no longer defined by the past, but by the future she had chosen to build with Alexander. She had found her place in the world, not as a servant, not as an outsider, but as a woman who had fought for her happiness and had won. And as the years passed, the love they shared continued to grow, becoming stronger with each day. They would face challenges, of course, as all couples do, but Jasmine had learned that true love was not about avoiding hardship. It was about standing together, hand in hand, no matter what came their way. And in the end, Jasmine knew that the best love stories weren't the ones that followed the rules, but the ones that made their own path. Theirs was a love that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of resilience, strength, and choosing each other again and again, no matter what the world said. Their destiny wasn't defined by the mistakes of the past or the judgments of others. It was revealed by the love they had built together. And as they looked ahead, they knew that their love would continue to change the world one moment at a time.